I never imagined that a child's innocent words could shatter a man's soul like glass under a hammer. But there I was, 71 years old, standing in my daughter's backyard with a homemade chocolate cake trembling in my hands, feeling the weight of 3 decades of love crumble in an instant. "Grandpa, you don't belong here," Tyler said, his 11-year-old voice cutting through the laughter like a siren. "Mom says you're just in the way." The world didn't stop spinning, but it might as well have. The smoke from the grill froze in the air. The chatter of neighbors and kids faded to a dull hum, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, a heart that had beaten steadily for my family through every storm, only to be pierced by this casual cruelty. Before we step into this one, if stories like this move you, a quick like or a comment telling me where in the world you are really keeps this channel breathing. I was born in 1935 in a small town tucked between the rolling hills of eastern Oregon. My father was a carpenter, my mother a schoolteacher. From the earliest days, I learned that life was measured not in wealth, but in work hands that built, minds that taught, hearts that endured. As a boy, I loved watching my father plane wood, the curls of shavings falling like ribbons to the floor. He would say, "Measure twice, cut once, Hank. Mistakes are easy, but precision lasts." Those words became a mantra, not just for carpentry, but for life. School was where I discovered numbers geometry, algebra, the quiet logic of equations. I loved how math could explain the world, how a formula could predict the strength of a beam or the arc of a bridge. My teachers noticed, and one in particular, Mrs. Callahan, told me, "You don't just solve problems, Harold. You see connections." By the time I reached college, civil engineering felt less like a career choice and more like destiny. I wanted to build things that endured, things that connected people across rivers, valleys, and divides. Bridges fascinated me most. They were more than steel and concrete, they were promises. A bridge said, "You can cross. You can reach the other side." In the 1960s, I worked on my first major project, a suspension bridge spanning a restless river in northern Oregon. I remember standing on the scaffolding, wind whipping against my face, watching the cables stretch like taut strings across the water. When it opened, families gathered, cars lined up, and children cheered as they crossed. I felt a pride so deep it seemed to anchor me to the earth. That pride carried me through decades of work roads, dams, structures meant to last lifetimes. I became known for my meticulousness, my refusal to cut corners. "Whitmore builds for the ages," colleagues would say, and I believed it. But permanence, I would later learn, is an illusion. Steel rusts, concrete cracks, and even the strongest bridges can collapse if the foundations are neglected. My wife, Margaret, understood this better than anyone. We met in college. She was studying literature, her mind full of stories and metaphors. She used to tease me, "You build bridges, Hank, but I build meaning." Together, we built a life, 2 children, a modest home, evenings filled with laughter and books. When she died, the house became hollow. The walls echoed with silence. The garden wilted without her touch. I tried to fill the emptiness with work, with memories, with the steady rhythm of routine. But permanence betrayed me. The bridge I thought would never falter, the one between us, collapsed in a single moment. And so, when Melissa began calling me in 2003, her voice trembling with need, I thought I understood. I thought I could build another bridge, this time between father and daughter, grandfather and grandchildren. I thought my hands, my heart, my resources could span the distance of their struggles. I was wrong. Margaret was the kind of woman who could make silence feel like music. I met her in the library at Oregon State University, her arms full of books, her hair tied back in a loose bun that seemed perpetually on the verge of unraveling. She studied literature, Shakespeare, Austen, Dickinson, while I buried myself in equations and blueprints. Our first conversation was about bridges, oddly enough. I was sketching a suspension design in the margins of my notebook, and she leaned over, curious. "Why bridges?" she asked. "Because they connect places that otherwise stay apart," I replied. She smiled. "That's what stories do too." It was the beginning of a lifelong dialogue, her words, my structures, both of us obsessed with connections. We married in 1960 in a small church with whitewashed walls and wooden pews. The reception was modest: sandwiches, cake, laughter, but it felt grander than any banquet. Margaret's laugh filled the room, and I remember thinking, this is permanence. This is the bridge I'll never let collapse. Our home in Bend was simple but alive. Margaret filled it with books, paintings, and flowers. I filled it with tools, sketches, and models. We raised 2 children, Melissa and her younger brother, Daniel, amid the chaos of bedtime stories and scraped knees. Margaret had a way of turning ordinary evenings into rituals. Tea at dusk, poetry read aloud, the garden tinted with reverence. She believed in patience. Everything grows slowly, she would say, kneeling in the soil, her hands stained with earth. Plants, children, even love. You can't rush it. When Daniel left for college and Melissa married Ryan, the house grew quieter, but Margaret kept it warm. She was my anchor, my compass, my reminder that permanence wasn't about steel or concrete, it was about care. Then came the diagnosis. It was a winter morning when the doctor said the word cancer. Margaret squeezed my hand, her eyes steady, as though she had already accepted what I could not. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, whispered prayers, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing grow weaker. She passed away in the spring, the garden just beginning to bloom. I remember standing among the marigolds she had planted, the air heavy with the scent of soil and rain, and feeling as though the world had tilted off its axis. The house became hollow. The walls echoed with silence. I tried to fill the emptiness with work, with memories, with the steady rhythm of routine. But permanence betrayed me. The bridge I thought would never falter, the one between us, collapsed in a single moment. I wandered through the rooms at night, touching her books, her teacups, her gardening gloves. I spoke to her sometimes, whispering into the quiet, hoping the walls would carry my words to wherever she was. It was in that hollow space that Melissa's calls began, her voice trembling, her words heavy with need. And I, desperate to feel useful again, desperate to rebuild some semblance of connection, answered every call. I thought I was building another bridge. I thought I was honoring Margaret's legacy of patience and care. But grief makes fools of us all. Melissa had always been the more restless of my 2 children. Where Daniel inherited Margaret's patience and quiet strength, Melissa carried my stubborn streak and a hunger for more. She was bright, ambitious, and fiercely independent in her youth. I remember her as a teenager, standing in the doorway of the garage where I tinkered with bridge models, declaring, "I'll never need anyone to take care of me." But life has a way of testing declarations. When she married Ryan, I had my reservations. He was charming, quick with a joke, but there was something in his smile that never reached his eyes. He worked odd job, sales, construction, even a stint in car dealerships, but nothing seemed to stick. Melissa insisted he was just finding his path. I wanted to believe her. By 2003, their path had narrowed into desperation. Ryan had lost another job, bills piled up, and Melissa's voice trembled when she called me. "Dad, I hate to ask, but we're drowning." The first request was small, a fraction of the mortgage. I wrote the check without hesitation. Helping felt natural, like breathing. Margaret would have wanted me to. But soon, the requests multiplied. Car repairs, school fees, medical bills. Each time, Melissa promised it was temporary. Each time, I believed her. At first, gratitude was abundant. "Thank you, Dad," she would say, her voice thick with relief. Ryan shook my hand, his grip firm, his smile rehearsed. Tyler and Emma hugged me, their innocence a balm to my weary heart. But gratitude has a half-life. By 2004, the tone of Melissa's calls had shifted. Less trembling, more expectation. "Dad, the car broke down again. Can you cover it?" No apology, no hesitation, just assumption. Ryan's emails were curt, sharp, demanding. "Need the usual. Mortgage due." I began to notice subtle changes. Melissa's eyes avoided mine when I visited. Ryan's smile grew thinner, his words clipped. The children sensed tension too. Tyler's mischievous sparkle dimmed when his parents glared. Emma grew quieter, her eyes darting between adults as though measuring the air. I told myself families go through rough patches. I told myself patience was kindness. But patience, I learned, can be mistaken for weakness. By 2005, I had given them more than $62,000. I never kept a ledger. I never told a soul. I thought I was helping. But somewhere along the way, my help became invisible. My presence became inconvenient. Calls arrived at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night. Emails grew sharper, more demanding. When I hesitated, I could feel the irritation in their tone, a subtle impatience, a hint of contempt. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And respect was fading. I began to feel the weight of invisibility. The man who had built bridges, who had laughed with his grandchildren, who had held their hands when they were scared, he was disappearing. All that remained was the wallet, the silent provider, the man who could be counted on to fund their lives. And yet, I continued, because hope dies slowly, even when reality screams otherwise. It's a strange thing, becoming invisible. Not in the literal sense people still saw me, still spoke to me, but in the way that mattered. The man I was, the father, the grandfather, the builder of bridges, was fading. What remained was a shadow, a wallet, a presence tolerated only when useful. The first time I truly felt it was subtle. Tyler had scraped his knee at school, and Melissa called me late at night, panic in her voice. I drove through the dark streets, the wind biting against the windshield, and cleaned his wound with careful hands. I stayed until he fell asleep, whispering stories about bridges and rivers, feeling like a hero. The next morning, Melissa barely acknowledged me. Ryan muttered something about bills. Tyler's knee healed, but the memory of my care vanished as quickly as it had come. I realized then that my presence was transactional. They wanted me, but only for what I could provide. I began to notice the small signs. Melissa's eyes sliding past mine at family gatherings. Ryan's smile, polite but hollow. The children's laughter dimming when tension filled the room. Conversations that once included me now flowed around me, as though I were furniture. At dinners, I would sit quietly, fork in hand, listening to stories I wasn't invited into. When I tried to speak, Melissa would interrupt, Ryan would change the subject, and Tyler and Emma would glance nervously at their parents before returning to their plates. I told myself it was stress. I told myself families go through rough patches. But deep down I knew. I was disappearing. Nights grew longer. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Had I given too much? Had I mistaken compliance for love? Was my entire life of generosity nothing more than weakness? I thought about the bridges I had built, structures meant to last decades, impervious to storms. And yet, the one bridge I had tried to build between myself and my family was crumbling. The phone calls became sharper. Dad, we need the usual. Mortgage is due. Car broke down again. No greetings, no warmth, just demands. When I hesitated, Melissa's tone hardened. Ryan's emails grew curt, almost contemptuous. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home. The garden Margaret had tended stood silent, weeds creeping through the soil. The rooms echoed with absence. I wandered through them, touching her books, her teacups, her gloves, whispering into the quiet. And yet, I kept giving. Because hope dies slowly. Because I believed, foolishly, that one day gratitude would return, that love would resurface, that the bridge would hold. But invisibility has a weight. It presses against your chest, it steals your breath, it convinces you that you are nothing. And I carried that weight, silently, until the day Tyler's words shattered me completely. Summer in Bend carried a peculiar kind of brightness, golden sunlight that lingered long into the evening. Pine trees swaying lazily in the heat, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. Tyler's 11th birthday was meant to be a celebration, a day of laughter and family. I had spent the week preparing. I bought him a model bridge kit, a replica of one of my favorite designs, carefully wrapped with a bow tied just so. I baked a chocolate cake from scratch, Margaret's old recipe, the one she used to make for every birthday. I imagined Tyler's eyes lighting up, Emma's giggles, Melissa's smile. I imagined family. When I arrived, neighbors waved politely. Children darted across the yard, their shrieks of joy mingling with the sizzle of burgers on the grill. I carried the cake and the gift, my heart swelling with anticipation. The backyard was alive with chatter. Plates stacked with potato salad, drinks clinking, laughter spilling into the warm air. I stepped toward the picnic table, smiling, ready to join. And then Tyler looked up at me. "Grandpa," he said, his voice casual, almost careless, "you don't belong here. Mom says you're just in the way." The words struck like a hammer against glass. The sun seemed too bright, the air too still. My throat constricted, my chest tightened. I tried to swallow, but the lump in my throat grew heavier. Melissa laughed. Ryan laughed. Even Emma giggled nervously. Someone muttered, "Kids, right?" But I knew. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't a child's misunderstanding. It was rehearsed. It was meant to wound. And it succeeded. I stood frozen, the cake trembling in my hands. The gift felt suddenly absurd, a fragile offering in a world that no longer wanted me. The laughter around me blurred, distorted, as though I were underwater. I could hear only the echo of Tyler's words, "You don't belong here." I took a step back, my hands clenched, my vision swimming. I walked away quietly, without a word, my gift still in hand, my heart heavier than anything I had carried in decades. The summer air pressed against my chest like a weight as I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. I felt as though I had been punched not in the stomach, but in the very core of who I was. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Tyler's words repeating themselves in my mind. "You don't belong here." My eyes stung, my chest ached. I asked myself questions I didn't want to answer. Had I given too much? Had I been foolish to believe love could be bought with sacrifice? The next morning, Ryan's voicemail arrived, casual and careless. "Mortgage is due tomorrow. Can you send the usual?" I stared at the phone, the words echoing like a challenge. I could have written a check, as I had countless times before. I could have returned to being the silent bank of the family. But something inside me had changed. I wrote a simple note instead, "You'll have to figure it out on your own." And for the first time in years, I felt relief. Not happiness, not triumph. Relief. The morning after Tyler's words, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The phone lay beside me, Ryan's voicemail still echoing in my ears. "Mortgage is due tomorrow. Can you send the usual?" For years, I had answered without hesitation. For years, I had written checks, mailed envelopes, transferred funds. It had become routine, automatic, expected. But now, something inside me had shifted. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling slightly. I thought about Margaret, about her belief in patience and care. I thought about the bridges I had built, structures meant to last lifetimes. And I thought about Tyler's words, "You don't belong here." Belonging, that was the wound. Not the money, not the demands, but the erasure of who I was. I picked up a pen and wrote a simple note. "You'll have to figure it out on your own." I pressed send. The silence that followed was deafening. No immediate call, no frantic message. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. Not happiness, not triumph, but the release of a burden I had carried too long. In the days that followed, the cracks began to show. Melissa's calls grew sharper, tinged with panic. Ryan's emails multiplied, their tone shifting from curt to desperate. Bills piled up, their calm facade crumbling. At first, guilt gnawed at me. I had always believed family comes first. I had always believed generosity was strength. But as the days passed, I realized the truth. My help had been taken for granted. My generosity had been exploited. My presence had been treated as a nuisance. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And respect had vanished. I walked through my quiet house, making tea, staring out the window at the garden Margaret had once tended. I thought about Tyler and Emma, their laughter still echoing in my mind. And I realized that what I needed to give them wasn't money anymore, it was stability. It was protection. It was boundaries. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of resolve. I wasn't a bank. I wasn't a burden. I was Harold Whitmore, a man who had built bridges, who had loved deeply, who had given without question. And now, I would protect what was mine: my dignity, my home, my grandchildren. The breaking point had come, and I would not turn back. 2 weeks after the barbecue, I heard the knock. It wasn't the casual rap of a neighbor or the hesitant tap of a friend. It was firm, official, businesslike. When I opened the door, a sheriff stood on my porch, a stack of papers in his hand. His expression was neutral, professional, but the weight of what he carried was anything but. "Mr. Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady though my stomach churned. He handed me the papers. "You've been served." I closed the door slowly, the sound of the latch echoing in the quiet house. My hands trembled as I unfolded the documents. At first, the words blurred, my eyes refusing to accept what they saw. But then the meaning struck like lightning. Melissa and Ryan had filed a guardianship petition. They claimed I was mentally unfit, forgetful, impulsive, vulnerable. They wanted control over my finances, my home, my life. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, the same place where I had written checks, where I had whispered to Margaret's memory, where I had tried to rebuild bridges. Now, Betrayal sat across from me, staring in black and white. I called Janice Keller, my lawyer. Calm, precise, terrifyingly smart. She listened as I stammered through the details. When I handed her the papers, she scanned them quickly, her brow furrowing. "Hank," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "This isn't just guardianship. This is exploitation." The word burned. Exploitation. Janice explained what they had done in my absence. Accounts opened in my name. Loans I had never applied for. Credit cards, purchases, bills, all assuming I would never notice. Checks written as if I were blind, unaware. They had built a system to take everything I had. I stared at the documents, disbelief and anger coursing through me. My own daughter, the child I had raised, the woman I had supported, had turned against me. Ryan, smug and careless, had orchestrated it. Together, they had plotted to erase me from my own life. Yet, amid the anger, a strange clarity emerged. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't weak. I had spent a lifetime analyzing details, tracking numbers, building structures that lasted decades. Now, all of that experience would serve me not for bridges or roads, but for protecting myself and my grandchildren. Janice leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "We'll fight this. We'll show the court exactly what they've done. You've built an iron wall here, Hank, and we're going to use it." For the first time since the barbecue, I felt a spark of hope. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where lives were dissected under fluorescent lights. I walked slowly through the double doors, my steps heavy, my heart pounding. Rows of benches lined the room, strangers whispering, eyes darting toward me. Melissa and Ryan sat across the aisle, their faces carefully composed, their lawyer whispering in their ears. Janice leaned close. "Stay calm, Hank. Facts will win." The judge entered, her robe flowing, her gaze sharp. The bailiff called the room to order. Melissa's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor," he began, "Mr. Whitmore is 71 years old. He struggles to manage his own affairs. He is forgetful, impulsive, vulnerable. It is in his best interest for his daughter and son-in-law to take over his financial decisions." I felt my chest tighten, but I remained still. Janice had warned me, "They'll paint you as frail. Don't let them see you rattled." When it was our turn, Janice rose with quiet confidence. She presented evidence, bank transfers, receipts, emails, documented communication. Every act of generosity accounted for. Every manipulative demand highlighted. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, turning to me, "can you explain why you gave your daughter and son-in-law these funds?" I stood slowly, my voice steady. "Because I believed in family. Because I thought I was helping. Because I wanted my grandchildren to be safe." The judge's eyes narrowed, interest peaked. She asked Janice for further documentation on Melissa and Ryan's financial dealings. It was the first crack in their plan. Witnesses were called. Melissa's neighbor testified that I often arrived late at night to help with the children, that I seemed lucid, capable, attentive. Ryan's former co-worker admitted he had a history of job instability, debts, and poor judgment. Janice cross-examined with precision. She exposed inconsistencies, contradictions, outright lies. Melissa's composure began to crumble, her voice trembling under scrutiny. Ryan's confident smirk vanished as emails and bank records were read aloud. I sat quietly, watching the tide turn. For years, I had been invisible. For years, my presence had been dismissed. But here, in this courtroom, the truth was visible. The judge leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Mr. Whitmore appears capable of managing his affairs. The evidence suggests exploitation, not incapacity." Melissa's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Ryan stared at the floor. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Weeks after the first hearing, Janice called me into her office. Her tone was clipped, urgent. "Hank, the investigators have findings. You need to see this." I sat across from her, the polished oak desk between us, my hands folded tightly to keep them from trembling. She slid a stack of reports toward me, each page heavy with numbers, signatures, and damning evidence. "They've been busy," Janice said, her voice steady but edged with anger. "Melissa and Ryan didn't just file a guardianship petition. They've been siphoning your life away." I scanned the documents, my eyes catching on words that felt foreign and cruel. Loan applications, credit accounts, forged checks. My name appeared again and again, attached to debts I had never incurred, purchases I had never made. "They opened credit cards in your name," Janice continued. "Applied for loans using your social security. They forged your signature on checks. They assumed you wouldn't notice, that you'd keep funding them blindly." I felt my chest tighten, my breath shallow. Betrayal burned sharp and real, coursing through me like electricity. My own daughter, the child I had raised, the woman I had supported, had orchestrated this theft. Ryan, smug and manipulative, had turned my generosity into a weapon. I sank back in the chair, staring at the papers. Cold coffee sat untouched beside me, the bitter scent filling the room. My hands trembled as I traced the forged signatures, each one a mockery of my trust. "They didn't just want your money," Janice said softly. "They wanted control. They wanted to erase you from your own life." The words struck deep. Erase me. That was the plan all along. Yet, amid the anger and heartbreak, a strange clarity emerged. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't weak. I had spent a lifetime analyzing details, tracking numbers, building structures that lasted decades. Every meticulous habit, every careful record, every act of precision, it all mattered now. I looked up at Janice, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Then we fight. We fight with everything we have." She nodded, her eyes sharp. "We will. And Hank, you need to know you're stronger than they think. You've built an iron wall here. We're going to show the court exactly who you are." For the first time in years, I felt something beyond despair. Not just hope, but resolve. Melissa and Ryan had tried to erase me, but I was still here, and I would not be silenced. The hardest blow wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the forged checks or the loans in my name. It was seeing Tyler and Emma caught in the middle, two children swept into a storm they couldn't understand. When child services intervened, they were placed in temporary foster care. I remember the first time I saw them afterward, in a stark office with beige walls and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Tyler sat stiffly in a chair, his shoulders hunched as though trying to make himself smaller. Emma clutched a worn blanket to her chest, her wide eyes darting nervously between the adults in the room. "Grandpa," Tyler's voice was hesitant, almost a whisper. I knelt slowly, careful not to overwhelm him. "Yes, buddy. It's me. I'm here." Emma peeked out from behind her brother, her voice trembling. "Are you really? Our grandpa?" "Yes," I said softly, my own voice breaking. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The caseworker watched silently, clipboard in hand, but in that moment the world narrowed to just us. I saw the fear etched into their faces, the confusion of children who had been told conflicting stories. Their parents had painted me as frail, forgetful, incapable. And yet here I was, kneeling before them, steady and present. Bringing them home was both joyous and terrifying. The house, once hollow, now echoed with the sound of cautious footsteps and whispered questions. Tyler peeked around corners, testing the environment, testing me. Emma clung to him, her small hand gripping his shirt like a lifeline. Meals were awkward. Tyler pushed food around his plate without eating. Emma whispered questions I could barely hear. I didn't rush them. I let them adjust at their own pace. We began small routines: breakfast together, homework at the kitchen table, short walks in the garden. I explained the seedlings, pointing out the marigolds Margaret had once planted. "Everything grows slowly," I told them. "People too. We just have to give it time." At night, when they went to bed, I sat quietly in the living room, thinking about what they had endured. Tyler had witnessed manipulation, deceit, and his parents' downfall. Emma had absorbed the tension in silence, her innocence shadowed by fear. I realized then that the real damage wasn't just financial, it was emotional, psychological. Trust had been broken on multiple levels. But slowly, in small moments, we began to rebuild. Tyler started helping me in the garden, carefully tending seedlings. Emma began drawing pictures and showing them to me with pride. Small victories, but monumental to us. And in those moments, I understood. My role wasn't to provide money anymore. It was to provide presence, stability, and love. In the weeks following the hearings, I found myself walking more often through the neighborhood. The streets of Bend were familiar, lined with pine trees, modest homes, gardens tended with care. Yet everything felt different. I carried the weight of betrayal, but I also carried the quiet strength of resolve. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Callahan, who lived 2 doors down, stopped me one afternoon as I tended the garden. "You look steadier, Hank," she said, her voice kind. "I was worried about you after Margaret passed. But now, you seem stronger." I smiled faintly, brushing soil from my hands. It's been a storm, but storms pass. Word of the guardianship petition had spread quietly through the community. Bend was small enough that whispers traveled quickly. Some neighbors offered sympathy, others cautious support. A few admitted they had suspected Ryan's instability for years. One evening, my old friend Richard, retired like me, once a fellow engineer, came by with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on the porch, the sun dipping low, the air cool with the promise of autumn. "You built bridges, Hank," he said, pouring us each a glass. "But sometimes the hardest bridge to build is between people. Steel and concrete are easy compared to trust." I nodded, the words sinking deep. I thought I could buy that trust. I thought generosity was enough. Richard shook his head. "Generosity without boundaries is a trap. You gave them everything, and they mistook it for weakness. But you're not weak. You're still here." The community became a quiet anchor. Neighbors dropped off meals, offered rides, checked in on Tyler and Emma. The children began to feel the warmth of a wider circle, a reminder that family isn't only blood, it's the people who choose to stand with you. At church, the pastor spoke one Sunday about resilience. We are tested not by the storms we face, but by how we rebuild afterward. I sat in the pew, Tyler beside me, Emma clutching my hand, and felt the words settle like seeds in soil. Even casual encounters carried meaning. At the grocery store, a clerk smiled at Emma's drawings. At the park, Tyler kicked a soccer ball with other children, his laughter genuine for the first time in months. I realized then that healing wasn't just happening inside my home. It was happening in the community around us. The betrayal had been sharp, but the support was steady. And slowly, I began to believe that we weren't alone. The call came on a gray morning, the kind where the sky hangs low and the air feels heavy. Janice's voice was steady, almost clinical. "They've been found, Hank. Out of state. Arrested last night." I sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, Tyler and Emma eating cereal nearby. Their laughter was faint, cautious, but real. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. Arrested. Melissa and Ryan had fled after the hearings, their calm facade finally crumbling under the weight of evidence. Investigators tracked them across state lines, their trail littered with unpaid bills and fraudulent accounts. When the knock came at their motel door, there was no escape left. The charges were staggering: fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation of an elderly person. Ryan, defiant to the end, tried to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. Melissa, pale and trembling, accepted a plea deal. The sentencing came weeks later. I sat in the courtroom, Tyler and Emma absent by court order, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Ryan stood before the judge, his arrogance stripped away, his voice hollow. 12 years in prison. Melissa, her plea deal accepted, received a reduced sentence but would carry the stain of her crimes forever. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was relief, quiet, steady, undeniable. The threat was gone. The storm had passed. Yet, beneath the relief, sorrow lingered. Melissa was my daughter. I had held her as a baby, taught her to ride a bike, watched her walk across the stage at graduation. And now, I watched her led away in handcuffs. I thought about Margaret, about the life we had built, about the family we had dreamed of. I wondered what she would say if she were here. Would she weep? Would she rage? Or would she remind me, as she always had, that love must be tempered with boundaries? Neighbors whispered afterward. Some said justice had been served. Others shook their heads, pitying Melissa's fall. But I knew the truth. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. It was about ensuring Tyler and Emma would never be left vulnerable again. That night, I sat in the garden, the air cool, the soil damp beneath my hands. I thought about bridges, how they can collapse under neglect, how they can be rebuilt with care. Melissa and Ryan had tried to erase me, but they had failed. And now, with the storm behind us, I could finally turn my focus to healing. Autumn arrived in Bend with crisp air and fiery leaves, the pines whispering in the wind. For the first time in years, the house felt alive, not with demands or tension, but with cautious laughter and the steady rhythm of routine. Tyler and Emma were adjusting slowly. Mornings began with breakfast at the kitchen table, homework spread across notebooks, pencils scratching quietly. Afternoons were spent in the garden, where the soil became both classroom and sanctuary. Evenings brought story time, quiet talks, and the gentle comfort of stability. The garden became our anchor. Tyler dug small holes for marigolds, his hands clumsy but determined. Emma planted sunflowers, patting the soil with care. "Grandpa," Tyler asked one afternoon, "why do you always talk to the plants?" I smiled, brushing dirt from my hands. "Because they need care, attention, and they grow better when they feel loved. People are the same, in a way." Emma tilted her head, her eyes wide. "Do you think we can grow big like the sunflowers someday?" "Every day, a little bit," I replied softly. "We all grow a little every day." Winter brought challenges. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Tyler flinched at raised voices in the grocery store. Emma hesitated to share her feelings. But we built warmth in small ways: hot cocoa by the fire, puzzles spread across the table, laughter echoing through the rooms. I noticed changes in myself too. The bitterness from betrayal began to melt away. The constant anxiety eased. In their presence, I found purpose again. My life wasn't just about being wronged, it was about being an anchor for those who needed me most. Spring arrived with renewal. The garden bloomed, seedlings pushing through the soil, colors returning to the earth. Tyler began to smile more genuinely, his laughter unburdened. Emma's drawings filled the house, pictures of flowers, bridges, and a home that finally felt safe. Neighbors noticed. "They seem happier," one remarked. And indeed, they were. The shadow of betrayal had lifted, replaced with warmth, structure, and genuine love. I realized then that healing wasn't a single moment. It was a season, a cycle, a slow unfolding. And just like the garden, it required patience, care, and unwavering attention. Spring sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patterns across the table where Tyler and Emma sat. Their pencils scratched against paper, Emma sketching flowers while Tyler doodled shapes that looked suspiciously like beams and arches. I watched them quietly, the memory of my own youth flickering in the back of my mind: sketches of bridges in the margins of notebooks, dreams of connecting places that seemed impossibly far apart. "Grandpa," Tyler said suddenly, lifting his head, "can we build something? Not just plants. Something big." I smiled. "What do you have in mind?" "A bridge," he said, his eyes bright. "Like the ones you used to build." The word struck deep. A bridge. Not steel or concrete this time, but something smaller, symbolic. Something we could build together. I rummaged through the garage, pulling out an old model kit I had kept for years, a replica of one of my favorite suspension designs. The box was dusty, the instructions yellowed, but the pieces were intact. We spread them across the table, Tyler's hands eager, Emma's careful. I guided them step by step, measuring, aligning, connecting. Tyler hammered gently, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emma painted the base, her strokes delicate but determined. As the structure took shape, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a model, it was a metaphor. Each piece we placed was a fragment of trust rebuilt. Each connection a reminder that bridges aren't just physical, they emotional, spiritual, familial. "Grandpa," Tyler said, holding a beam steady, "is this how you built the big ones?" "In a way," I replied. "Every bridge starts small. Every connection begins with care." Emma looked up, her eyes wide. "Does this mean we're building us too?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what it means." Hours passed, the bridge slowly rising from the table. When we placed the final piece, Tyler let out a cheer, Emma clapped her hands, and I felt a swell of pride unlike any I had known in years. We stood back, admiring the structure. It wasn't perfect, some beams crooked, some paint uneven, but it was ours. A bridge built not with steel or concrete, but with love, patience, and resilience. That night, as the children slept, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the completed model. I thought about the bridges I had built in my career, structures meant to last lifetimes. And I realized that this small model, imperfect and fragile, was the strongest bridge I had ever built, because it connected me to the people who mattered most. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet Margaret used to fill with music, laughter, and the rustle of pages from her books. Tyler and Emma were asleep, their breathing steady, their dreams safe. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, paper before me, the garden visible through the window. I hadn't written to Margaret in years. At first, after she passed, I whispered to her in the silence, hoping the walls would carry my words. But tonight, I needed more. Tonight, I needed permanence. I began slowly, the ink flowing across the page. My dearest Margaret, it has been years since you left, and yet I feel you everywhere in the garden, in the laughter of our grandchildren, in the quiet strength you taught me. I thought I understood permanence when I built bridges, but I only truly understood it when I built a life with you. Melissa betrayed me. She and Ryan tried to erase me, to take everything we built. They used my love, my generosity, my patience, and twisted them into weakness. For a time, I believed them. For a time, I thought I was invisible. But then Tyler spoke words that cut me deeply. You don't belong here. And in that pain, I found clarity. I realized that belonging isn't given, it's built. Just like a bridge, it requires care, attention, and strength. And I began to rebuild. With Janice's help, I fought back. The court saw the truth. Melissa and Ryan faced justice. It wasn't triumph I felt, but relief. Relief that the storm had passed, that Tyler and Emma could finally be safe. The children live with me now. At first, they were cautious, their trust fragile. But slowly, we found a rhythm. Breakfasts together, homework at the kitchen table, afternoons in the garden. Tyler builds birdhouses, Emma plants marigolds. They laugh again, Margaret. They laugh. We built a bridge together, the three of us. Not steel or concrete, but a Model A symbol. Each piece was a fragment of trust, each connection a reminder that love endures. It isn't perfect, but it is ours, and it is strong. I think of you often. I think of your patience, your belief that everything grows slowly. You were right. Healing takes time. Love takes time. But with care, it grows. And now, in the warmth of our rebuilt lives, I feel peace. The strongest bridges aren't built with steel or concrete. They're built with love, trust, patience, and unwavering care. That is the lesson you left me. That is the legacy I carry forward. I miss you, Margaret. But I see you in Tyler's laughter, in Emma's drawings, in the garden blooming once more. And I know that, in some way, you are still here. Always here. With love, always. Hank. I set the pen down, my hands steady. Outside, the garden swayed in the evening breeze, marigolds glowing softly in the fading light. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not in victory, but in survival. Not in revenge, but in resilience. The storm had passed. The bridge had been rebuilt. And in the warmth of our new life, I finally felt at home. What I've learned plus a few words for everyone. I've lived 71 years, and if there's one truth I've learned, it's this. Bridges aren't only made of steel and concrete. They're made of trust, patience, and love. And just like steel, those things can corrode if neglected. I'm here as someone who has lived through storms, betrayal, and heartbreak, and who has found, somehow, a way to rebuild. My message to you. So here is what I want to leave you with. Guard your generosity with boundaries. Never confuse compliance with love. Remember that healing takes time, but it always comes if you nurture it. And know that the bridges you build with patience and care will outlast any storm. Because in the end, the strongest structures aren't the ones that span rivers or valleys. They're the ones that span hearts. If this story landed heavy for you, know that you're far from alone in feeling it. Stories like Mr. Hank's stir up real emotions, anger, grief, relief, maybe even a quiet sense of peace. If something here resonated, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in his shoes? Ever had to draw that hard line with family? Or did kindness ever come back to bite you? Your words might be exactly what someone scrolling right now needs to see. If you think more people deserve to hear these truths before it's too late, a like helps the story travel further. And if these real, raw tales about betrayal, boundaries, and rebuilding hit home for you, consider subscribing plus the bell. More coming soon. Thanks for staying until the end. You're part of a community that values self-respect over forced loyalty. Take care of yourself out there.